Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Seems to me I've got to stay. Anyway, I'm the same man with or without this.
Well, that isn't so.
I expect he'll come looking for me. 3 of his old bunch are waiting at the depot.
Well, that's exactly why we ought to go.
They'll just come after us. 4 of them. We'd be all alone on the prairie.
Let the movie speak.
Hello, everyone across the podcast world, or should I say, howdy, partners.
Howdy.
Or perhaps do not forsake me, my partners. I'm here. I'm Justin, and with my friend and co-host Travis here. Before we get into talking about today's movie, High Noon, we're just gonna also talk about a few other things under the sun, and of course we have to get our pleasantries out of the way. And I do mean that begrudgingly. So to Travis, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you? I'm doing real good over here. How are you doing?
Read it like we practice, Travis.
How are you?
Not there. You go. There you go.
So
That's
happy
the innocent
to be here.
inflection.
You were under the weather this week, and yet you showed up for the podcast. You're such a troop. You're like the Gary Cooper of our times.
Well, you know what they say about a cowboy.
What do they say?
He ain't sick because he's dying.
I don't know what any of that
That's true.
meant,
The mortality
but,
rate was abysmal back then. So
yeah.
The average lifespan of a grandfather is 26 years young.
So today we're going to talk about High Noon, Travis,
Yes.
and I think this is going to be, we've hit a pretty good stride so far. We've talked about how we've been fortunate so far in the 50s to just have movies that we have pretty much seen eye to eye on and thought we've been really blessed by the quality of movie overall. And although I guess Sabrina maybe wasn't quite the home run, maybe what the other ones have been, but still a good movie.
Yeah.
And so this may kind of even though I'll just spoil it right away. I do enjoy this movie, but I think your reaction might be a little more tepid.
Yes. A little color me puzzled, Justin. Is that a thing you say? Color me. Yeah, sure.
It is. Color your puzzles.
Color my puzzles, man. Like, I don't even know where the pieces go for this one. I'm missing a piece and I'm jamming another piece and another one. It's just not, the pieces don't go together.
That's because you're playing Jenga. That's not a puzzle.
You're right.
It's going to crash.
Before it crashes, we should probably just talk about what we watched this week, don't you think?
Okay, let's probably do that. Travis, usually you just throw it right to me, so I'm gonna steal that, and I'm gonna take the initiative like a true cowboy.
Oh,
Always takes that first scoop of baked beans, sucks it down with the lemon peel.
Please stop.
I'm not sure what's happening in the chuck wagon, but we're gonna need to clean up on aisle 7.
Okay.
So before we get to your movie, I'm going first. Okay?
Plot twist. I did not see that coming.
Check it out.
Holy
all right?
cow.
I'm not seeing this crap coming.
Okay, go for it.
So in keeping with the theme, actually, of High Noon and Westerns in general, I watched the 2011 animated film Rango. With my family.
Nice.
First time.
Yes.
And what a great movie, especially for someone like me who grew up on way too many Westerns.
Yes.
And no, I'm not a baby boomer, but somehow it got like passed down hereditarily. I have a affinity for the genre, and Rango is such a great send up
Yeah.
of the genre. There is a reference not just to westerns. There's also references to all kinds of other movies and things.
Yeah.
But
and
it's a great
Shakespeare and existentialism, and it's
Yes.
really it's
Yeah.
wild. Yeah.
It is its own thing for sure.
Yeah.
And it's really, even though my kids enjoyed it, I can't, like, so much of that humor is rapid fire. It's really verbose.
Yeah.
It's a lot more lowbrow than something like Frasier, but it reminded me a bit of Frasier, and just like turn the subtitles on because you're gonna
Yeah.
miss something. It is coming fast.
It's
you know?
snappy.
You were talking
Yeah.
about our stupid bit about puzzles a second ago,
Yeah.
and there's like a toad in there that has this line where he says, "It's a puzzle like a mammogram," and I'm thinking, that is not for a kid, you know?
Oh, that's so good. Why are their voices so good? Like, can you explain to me?
Yeah, Johnny Depp is incredible,
So
and
good.
Timothy Olyphant as the Spirit of the West. I
Is
mean,
ridiculous.
there's
Yeah.
a twist I did not see coming.
Yep.
Um,
That's 2 checks on your bingo card. Timothy Oliphant, and he's doing Clint Eastwood as the man with no name. It's like he's on a
Yeah.
golf cart for some reason. Like, it is so fun.
with his metal detector.
Yeah.
No, it's a lot of fun. And I think it surprisingly actually had something to say, and there's a little bit of a message in there about you are more what you do than what you say. I mean, I guess
Sure.
people would know that from the silly, you're gonna walk the walk or talk the talk, but it is kind of it's delivered in more of a encouraging or triumphal
Yeah.
tone where you can be your own it's like start whenever, and start making the changes you'd like to see in your life.
Yep.
So I was really surprised. I really enjoyed that movie. I think you had recommended it to me many years ago.
Yeah.
So I finally got around to watching it. I do listen to you, Travis.
Oh,
But
that's nice.
two thumbs up and a chameleon tail
nice.
for me. What about you? What'd you watch?
Before I say what I watched, I just want to say that Bill Nighy does the voice of
Yeah.
the villain in that movie, and he is extremely British in real life, and he sounds
Right.
incredible in the movie. Like he's the like big bad
Yeah.
snake guy, and I just remember watching it
Yes.
with my kids. And there's a couple. Honestly, it's what if you care about this kind of thing and you're like very careful about what you put in your kids' ears, or whatever. It
Right.
has a couple like mild swears or whatever.
Just like Star Wars.
For sure. It's Star Wars level of language, so take that with a grain of salt. But I do remember a specific line of dialogue where I was like watching it and being like smiling from ear to ear and also looking over at my
Yeah.
kids like, are they okay? Because he's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to send you straight to hell. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
pretty
I think that's right after he
good.
says, "Damn you, woman."
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that's very, if we can, I'm not saying that this is not related to whether or not children should be exposed to that. That's a choice for parents, of course.
Sure.
But that felt so intentionally written. I mean,
Yes.
that whole interaction really crescendos, and that is the emotional climax of the movie.
Yeah.
When and it has this delicious spaghetti western score where Rango
Yeah.
comes walking down the street right before that. It's so good. So in other words, it's not like throwaway, like, ooh, they're just trying to make this an edgy kids movie or something. They earned that.
Okay. I rewatched. You'll probably have zero skin in the game for what I'm about to say, Justin. So I will try to be brief and not bore you or the listeners. I rewatched because I am a Stephen King fan and nerd. Read a lot of his stuff, and I try to see most of the adaptations because he's an interesting case of like, how do you adapt this guy's work? He writes a lot of introspective, like parenthetical stuff, and so it's hard to put on screen sometimes. I rewatched both of the new It movies, so the creepy clown. If that might be all you know about It. If you're of our generation, you think of Tim Curry, in the miniseries.
Creepy clown.
Yeah. Anyway, I rewatched those because I remember liking them fine when they came out, but I had some quibbles, like plenty of people did and do about things. The thing that I was struck by watching both of them back to back is that it's a lot different for somebody who's adapting and directing and kind of caring for a project like that to take it on as a real fan. You know what I mean? Like we have people like J.J. Abrams who like they take Star Wars and they're real fans. Clearly, they're real fans, but like that can kind of go a few steps into the wrong direction of like now the movie exists to be fan service to Star Wars fans, you know. And so there's Easter eggs that are way too obnoxious and out front, and there's stories that love the character, the iconography of the character, but they don't really care for the character and what they do with the stories or you know whatever. And this guy Andy Muschietti, who did these movies, he has an interesting like career, but like his sister is his producer, so it's kind of like a interesting partnership there. If you care about these things, or if this is in your wheelhouse, if you like kind of spooky things or Stephen King things or whatever, he knows exactly what the most important things are about this story, which is that, yeah, there's a creepy clown and there's sequences that are, you know, horrifying for various reasons. But the most important piece of the novel, which is like 1,200 pages long, it's massive, is that it's a coming of age story. It's like everything you like about Stranger Things when it's kind of poignant and it's about kids growing up. Everything you like about, you know, Stand By Me and whatever, pick your coming of age story. It is that's the most important thing about it, not the boo. Let's do the jump scares and whatever. And there's jump scares and there's, you know, spooky imagery. But I think they both, chapter 1 and 2, they both age really well for someone like me because he gets at the heart of what Stephen King is like best at, which is, yeah, he's good at scaring us, but he's also really good about writing humanity, you know, just like making people that feel real and that experience the same things we do and go through the same things we do. And in this case, people growing up and people coming back home after a long time and feeling that sense of, you know, I don't have a place here anymore, you know? And so like, those are the things that are most important about the story. And he gets those just bang on right, in my opinion. So it's like the weirdest review for these movies you might ever hear, because most people watch these and they're like, I want to be scared. And I'm like, sure, you could be scared, but that's not what's most important about the story. Like it's really about how we grow up and how we grow into adulthood and what do we do with our agency when we become adults. And I think they're really fun and good. And I think the guy who made them loves the most important things about the story. So if you care about these things, check them out. They're around, and you know, you've probably seen them if you care, because the first one made more money than like any horror movie ever has. So, Justin, when do you suppose in this life you might get around to watching It and It Chapter 2?
Not in this life. It's just not really, you know, I like horror, but I think maybe not really of that variety so much.
Yeah.
Just an odd duck, I guess, Travis.
No, it's totally fine. And you know what? We complete each other. I think we've said that. Have we said that every episode so far? I think we have.
Right.
Yeah.
We need just that clip from Jerry Maguire on repeat.
Yeah. I know I don't say it enough, but you complete me.
Right. We need to edit it to say "we complete me."
We complete me.
Yes.
Oh, grammar
That's
experts.
how they did it back on the prairie.
Oh, speaking of that, where I love horror, you kind of love Westerns, I think, with the same fervor. So, and I like Westerns too, just fine. But we should get into our discussion today. We're talking about one of the most iconic Westerns around, one of the most influential in a lot of ways. It's like historically significant for a few reasons, and it's called High Noon. So in the intro, Justin, we try to. Sometimes we talk about this in the pre intro, but I don't think we specifically asked this question yet. What is your relationship with this movie, man? Because I know it's different from mine.
I have seen this movie before. I don't know how many times, but it had been several years since I had seen it. I take it you have perhaps not seen this before?
Well, now I have, but yeah, this is
well, that's good. We'll have a little more to talk about.
first time watch, and I think been because of the if you listen to the opening episodes of this series, you will be aware that we suffered a horrible robbery. And when we were putting this list together roughly a decade ago, we were like, oh man, Westerns started like happening in this decade. They really like exploded in the 60s and late 50s, I guess. But like we should put in a Western. And so I threw a couple names out there, and you have seen like all the names I kept throwing out there. You're like, no, not that one. I was like, okay, I trust you. And I was like, well, how about this one? And you were like, not worth our time. And I was like, okay. And I threw out High Noon, and you were like, this is, I remember distinctly, you were like, sure, we could do High Noon, and it was like that one, it didn't, I wouldn't say like it struck a chord to be selected, but it was like, yeah, that's significant enough. That's maybe an important enough movie, or one that isn't a waste of time. And hey man, speaking of waste of time, it's an hour and 25 minutes long. And I think credits might be included in that.
I think they are.
Yeah. So a bygone era where the movie was under 90 minutes and told a whole stinking story.
Right. And won a ton of Oscars.
Yeah. And yeah, can you imagine a movie that's 90 minutes winning Oscars these days, let alone under 90 minutes? Yeah.
No. Well, what is 90 minutes anymore? I mean, is there hardly even low budget comedies that are that short?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like studio comedies even exist much. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
People aren't putting studio comedies in theaters anymore. Those end up on streaming like 2/3 of the time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But like what your 90-minute movie used to be, basically one of two things. It would be a comedy or a horror flick. And like the 90-minute mark was like, that's all you got, and your audience is going to check out. You cannot justify 2 hours with a genre movie in either of those camps. So, and I think Westerns kind of lived there for a while. Like you can look at a list of 50s Westerns and like you'd be hard pressed to find something over 2 hours, just because these were,
right.
In a lot of ways born out of kind of similar genre, like fare as a horror movie or a little like slapsticky comedy paperback book. Right. And so we don't think of paperback book genres being like Gone with the Wind level investments for an audience. So I do think the brevity of it is kind of cool. And yeah, like you said, it is a well-renowned film. It is a Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning film. This again was back when the cinematography Oscar was split because there was enough color and enough black and white coming out where they didn't quite know what to do with that, so they started giving black and white. And anyway, so won Best Actor for the man himself, Gary Cooper, and John Wayne accepted the award on his behalf, which is interesting, and we can talk about why later. Editing, which is weird, and we can talk about that later too. And then Best Original Song for, you guessed it, High Noon, parentheses, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, by Justin. Who's the guy who sings the song again? Remind me.
Tex Ritter, John Ritter's dad.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Yeah, he was a big country western. He was one of them pioneers of country music back in the day.
If it was today, it'd be Bruno Mars singing "Do Not Forsake Me." Oh my! Wait.
Yeah, let's hear it. What would a bar from that sound like?
I don't know. I just realized Bruno Mars is like a decade-old reference at this point.
Yeah, we are quickly headed for the grave, is what you're telling me.
Like today's Neil Young. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
Have you heard did you know he did an album, this is probably years ago too, but he literally, one of the lyrics to one of the main tracks on that album was like, Monsanto.
Oh, yeah.
Down with Monsanto. It was like, what?
I don't know, man.
There's no subtext at all here, Neil. What's going on?
I love Neil Young.
I do too.
He just freaking rules. Anyway, we're not talking about Neil Young today.
Well, he's in this movie. That's why he's got a little cameo.
You know what? He could be one of the kids running around town, probably at this age,
Yeah.
right? Well, he'd be like 2 years old, probably.
He's the one that's like, excuse me, mister, I've been searching for a heart of gold, and I'm growing old. And he's like, get out of my way, kid, unless you want a badge. No, I think I'm a little too young. Well, then scram.
Here, take this gun, kid. We're going to fight the bad guys. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
nominated for all the big ones: screenplay, director, picture, and then it won those three that I mentioned. I thought it won cinematography. I guess I'm wrong. Anyway,
Was it just nominated?
not even nominated for cinematography. I must have misread somewhere. Yeah.
Maybe that was at the. This is great podcasting when we just try to figure out what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But maybe it was nominated and won some Golden Globes too. So I wonder if
That's what I'm thinking of. It did win the Golden Globe for black and white cinematography.
Okay.
So anyway,
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Give us our props, everybody.
We are clearly film historians, and this is all
Clearly.
being enshrined in the history books. So this is a very simple story. It is not a long runtime, and it is saying some stuff that we'll get into in the next section here. And I will just say, to preface my thoughts on the movie, I like Westerns. I say I like Westerns, but I don't have nearly as much of an affinity for them as you, or I haven't seen nearly as many of them. So maybe if I watched as many as you, I'd like them, more or whatever, if I had a bigger sample size. But like, there are some Westerns that are in my memory bank that I think of as like some of the best movies I've ever seen, stuff like Unforgiven, which I think is like kind of a perfect movie. You recommended Slow West to me, I think a year or two ago. That movie is awesome. I remember liking even the popcorny kind of ones. Like, I remember liking 310 to Yuma and, Open Range, and like the ones that aren't nearly as, maybe thematically ambitious, but like it's a genre that I'm not averse to. However, I did find myself like, I'm a pretty good movie watcher. Like, I try to pay real close attention, and for the podcast at least, I take notes to try to remember things that seem significant. And like, this was one, Justin, where I kind of found my mind wandering at times, and kind of I guess wondering, like, oh, okay, this is it. Like, this is the story they're telling, and there's not like there's not some sort of like second act explosion, or I don't mean plot twist, but like there's nothing shakes this movie off of its course from scene one. You know what I'm saying? The simplicity of the story. So what do you think about how it's kind of set up story wise and how that pays off?
Well, it seems to be a movie that's set up practically in real time. He's got an hour to wait for the train, and essentially the movie takes, just a little over an hour to tell its whole story.
And that's kind of cool. Yeah.
It is. It's you're absolutely right, and I don't think there's anything wrong with not liking the way that this movie is delivered. Really, one of the reasons I thought this would be an interesting movie for us to discuss is because in my opinion anyway, it's a good movie, but this movie has engendered so much film criticism. I don't mean negative, just like scholarly criticism. Books have been written about this, especially because of its connection to the blacklist fiasco in Hollywood.
Right.
And so many U.S. presidents have played this movie in the White House. Bill Clinton played it. Ronald Reagan played it. John Wayne hated it. The Soviet Union hated it. It's a movie that has engendered a lot of wide range of emotions, but no shortage of people. Even just a couple years ago, I think a guy wrote a book about High Noon and the blacklist era in Hollywood. So I thought it would just be a good movie because it's informative, I think, in so much as you and I like to nerd out a little bit about sort of context of the movie and historically, not just, in 1952 what was going on, but in cinema world specifically what was going on and how has this affected cinema world. I think you're absolutely right that it is very informative on, even the movie Rango has some callbacks to this movie. And so it's clearly a movie that has earned its place. I think this is one of the very first movies that the National
Film Registry.
Here I go again, listeners. Yeah. What's that called?
National Film Registry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's I think it was one of the first couple or something that they
selected.
That was selected for preservation. Thank you. So yes, it is a very simple movie though, and if you want to read it on the blacklist, if you want to see it through that lens only, which allegedly, some people argue that is what the director Fred Zinnemann who, and I think Carl Foreman too, the screenplay writer, were both zeroed in on people that had to, defend themselves, and say, assert that they were not part of the Red Menace, heavens to Betsy. And so if you see it from that point of view, and if you imagine that this is a movie where these guys are trying to say, look, this is what it's like to be blacklisted. You're the only one. You're just trying to do the right thing. You're trying to do what you think is right, and everyone is turning their back on you.
Yeah.
These people that you thought were your friends, these people that you thought were your community, they're all gone. And so I think that is interesting in and of its own. And I also think it's interesting just on its surface, if you didn't know that context. It's a very interesting meditation on what it means to have a sense. I think in our pre-game show, whatever you want to call it, Travis, you called it, a sense of duty or a sense of honor.
Yeah.
This guy, he is the lawman for the town. And so in a nutshell, the plot of this movie is just that the marshal, who Gary Cooper plays, is Will Kane.
Yeah.
And he just gets married to Grace Kelly, Grace Kelly's character, rather. She plays Amy Fowler. And they're going to get ready to go off and open a store or something in another town. But unfortunately, alas, before they can leave, and before the new marshal shows up to take his place, Frank Miller, this guy that Kane had sent to jail or to prison, there it is. Bring it, Tex. Yeah. He's coming over the hill. I have to tell you, though, man, for as simple of a cinematography job as this movie does, that very first shot of Lee Van Cleef just standing up, it just warms the cockles of my heart.
Of course it does. Of course, your heart, yes.
Yeah, in my heart, yes. So I do acknowledge there's some implicit bias there, but
yeah, I'm glad it warms the cockles of your heart. Like, it's Lee Van Cleef in an early role, man. Like, it's pretty cool. To see.
Okay, real quick, since we're on Lee Van Cleef and we've talked about Sunset Boulevard, right?
Yeah.
I think we mentioned there's that whole subplot about how a character in there, a female character, is told, like, hey, you need to go get your nose done if you're gonna get it right. Okay. That actually happened to Lee Van Cleef.
No way.
He was told, you need to get a nose job done, and I forget what the role was for. But it was like, hey, we're going to get you like a serious, not like, a B character or something. You're going to be, here's a role for you.
Yeah.
Just got to get your nose done. And he was like, I'm not doing that. My name is Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah.
And so he was just relegated to playing these kind of bad guys, because of course, if you have a nose that looks like that, you're evil. I don't know if you know that, everybody. Your nose doesn't look perfect like a Greek god. You're evil.
Yeah. If I see a guy with a nose like that walking down the street, I hide my children immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like,
as
the
you
nose.
should, so.
Yeah, it's bad.
But thank goodness Sergio Leone found him when he was really down and out, and made him for what he's mostly remembered for today.
And then John Carpenter found him later and remade him into this awesome character actor.
Yeah. I mean, he's a fantastic actor.
He's so good.
No problem there.
Yeah, he's so good.
But anyway, back to this story here, right? So Frank Miller, this outlaw, is come back to town, and Miller has made it apparent and known to everyone that his mission is to kill Will Kane, the man that sent him to prison, right? And so the moral dilemma for Kane at first is, well, everyone's telling me I should just leave with my wife, and I mean, yeah, we just did get married. I don't want to, make her a widow right now. So yeah, I guess we'll go. But as he's going down the road, he realizes I got to turn this horse and buggy around, and he goes back to try to collect a posse and to face off Frank Miller and his gang, and unfortunately quickly finds that people just don't want to get involved.
Right.
And they don't want him to be involved either. They're actually there's hostility towards him just doing what he believes is the right thing to do. And I think it's a really interesting commentary on that's just human nature, right? Where people I as much as the next person, I think, would much rather avoid conflict if we can. And would much rather not have to do difficult things if we don't have to do them. I don't necessarily go seeking out difficult things to do just for the heck of it, even if they could be beneficial, unfortunately. That's just human nature. And so Kane is left with this dilemma where he thinks, if I don't do what this town has hired me to protect it and to represent law and order. someone is coming to town to try to kill me, the representative of law and order, and if I leave and there is no one else who is here to take my place, what good does that do anybody? Because who stands in the breach now against them?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really, it's one of those things I don't think that can be told too often or reminded, or I can't be reminded of too often anyway, of just that the knowledge that doing the right thing does sometimes suck, and it can be very costly, but that doesn't mean that it's not right.
No, yeah. I think you're I mean, the plot isn't worth like going beat for beat on, because that's the story. Like, these three dudes, bad dudes, coming back to town. They have a history with Kane. He knows it's going to be bad, and so he tries to rally people. People are, kind of range between, they want to be apathetic all the way to like run, do their own version of running. And I think the most interesting parts about this story for me, watching it, is like, I don't know, like I think the Western leading man is an interesting thing to study, right? Because you've got like the archetype we look at most today and sort of compare everything to. The barometer for Western leading man is Clint Eastwood. It's the man with no name. It's the sort of that mixed with the Dirty Harry, which is sort of a modern neo-Western or whatever. Like, I just think everything for me comes back to what is it like compared to that? And so then you've got other movies where people are more charismatic and more, maybe not as soft spoken or minimally, dialogue heavy in the way that they're used. I don't think Gary Cooper in and of himself for me is like by a long shot the most interesting part of this movie or this story. I think all the little characters around him were the things that caught my eye, and I'm scribbling notes. I have very few notes about him because he's not bad in the movie, and I think he's doing fine. He's obviously a very capable actor. I remember liking Sergeant York a lot when I watched it, like when I was in like 7th grade, But like he's sort of saddled with the job, like this character saddled with the job of like, he goes to people and then the thematic things kind of come to the surface, So you've got all these B characters that pop up, and he's interacting with them, but they oftentimes, to me, are saying the most interesting stuff. Like, his character obviously represents the moral good, the moral center, the sort of like, no, I have that, like you said, the sense of duty. And I also have this wife that I just, married an hour ago. And like, there's all these things happening for him, and there's tension there. But like, the other people in the story were the ones that I was like, oh man, that's kind of fun and cool. And so if we can, because they all intersect with him, he's in like, pretty much every scene of the movie other than a couple. Maybe we can touch on the kind of grab bag of themes that the movie deals with. So you already mentioned kind of the political parallels, or the political themes that people have commented on before, and they're probably there. I think you mentioned the director and the writer were questioned as part of the Red Scare. Also, Lloyd Bridges, who he plays Deputy Marshal Harvey Pell. He's a face you might recognize, actually. He's in the Airplane movies. He's in Hot Shots. So he's in like some real goofy kind of 80s comedies. But Justin, he's also Izzy Mandelbaum in that episode of Seinfeld. He's like the old trainer man. You remember that? He just kind of pops up in things. He's kind of he's almost like a Leslie Nielsen type later on in his career, He was also questioned as a potential member of the Communist Party. But I think the thing that struck me first, that wasn't just like kind of pure plot movements, Western plot movements, was by the time they get to the scene in the church, which is kind of, I don't know, it's probably like halfway or maybe even 2/3 of the way through the movie. That scene kind of unlocked for me like what I think this movie might be saying about some stuff. So he is, he has gone around trying to rally people to the cause and, deputize them and hand them a rifle and get them ready to defend their town. And it's made clear that he has come in as a marshal, and he's really like made a difference. People talk about how this wasn't a place to raise kids, and killing is down, or whatever they say. Like things are better now, and he's about to retire or move on or just be a married dude for a while. And so he busts into church, which is kind of a shocking little moment because they're having this service where they're singing, and the parson is up there, and he comes in and interrupts the service. The parson's like an interesting little piece of this because he has a little moral conflict of his own, right? He says like, you know, if you're going to interrupt church, you can interrupt church, but I'm not going to join you in rallying people to fire bullets all across town, essentially. So you've got that going on, and at the same time, you've got our good buddy who we reviewed in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Thomas Mitchell, a great character actor with an awesome character actor face, who plays the mayor, and he sort of stands up alongside Will Kane and sort of tries to keep order. And in that scene, Justin, the things that pop up are really interesting because it's like you've got stuff about, you know, politicians and taxes and law enforcement mismanagement and like people saying things like it's your problem, and other people saying like, no, it's not his problem, it's ours. So the sense of community, that's the one scene I think to me that it kind of dug into what was most important about the story with so many different little voices. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is one of the most affecting scenes, or certainly at least one of the most important ones. And the movie, even though it doesn't really seek to be a deep dive on any of these things, I think it presents some really interesting, bear with us listeners, some interesting theological questions. Because like you said, the parson is not really, he remains pretty non-committal, and it's not that he is trying to be weak or you know, just this kind of amoeba of like, well, it doesn't really matter, guys, I'm actually a postmodern parson from the Wild West. You know, that's not
pretty awesome.
He instead is unsure of really what to recommend and do, and I think it's honestly one of the saddest scenes in the movie, because here is, you know, a time and a place in this kind of community in this era of American history where a lot of folks would take at least people that were going to church would take their moral authority up with the, you know, the pastor, the preacher, the parson, the priest. And to have that person in that kind of moral authority seat say, I'm not really sure what to do.
Yeah.
It just puts that weight deeper into Will Kane's character.
Yeah.
Because he goes, I am so alone that the person that is supposedly the man of God doesn't even know what to tell me to do.
That disillusionment is pretty meaty, you know what I mean? And like
Absolutely.
The sort of like public panic like part of that scene I think works really well. That's something, Justin, that I've been kind of like infatuated by lately, is like movies that get I want to say mob mentality, although that's sort of like the extreme version of it, but like the public, you know, I don't know if it's just because of the last 6 or 8 years in our country of just like, you know what I mean? Like going through different little ebbs and flows of like total outrage back to like, everything's fine, and total outrage and everything, you know? And so I think those things resonate for me, at least right now. Maybe in 5 years, I'll be like, I don't know what I was on about. But like movies that capture that in a really true way are like, those are the moments that stick out to me. You know what I mean? When a group of people is standing around and you have kind of every type of person who's like, you know, I'm going to take this opportunity to complain about the fact that my tax dollars didn't go and do what I thought they were going to. I think that this is the police's fault from the beginning, or, you know, like whatever the thing is, whatever side of the issue it's coming from, just that idea of like, you need a Thomas Mitchell to be standing in the middle of the room, just telling you like guys, like we have got to see the forest from the trees here. You know, like he's not even telling them what to do. He's just like moderating the nuts like dialogue that's taking place. And to me, that was like, because Thomas Mitchell is so sympathetic, you know, we talked about him in Mr. Smith, and like, he's just such like, his face, you have to like him, you know, he's like got one of those likable set of eyes, and like, and so when he's the one standing up there being like, everybody, you know, quiet down, you know, for a minute. I found that sequence capturing that particular dynamic to be really like timeless. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty much like that today. You know, you could have a modern problem pop up and the same kind of voices kind of screaming into an echo chamber until somebody just goes like, one at a time, people. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So that's kind of cool that this movie from 1952, that's an hour and 25 minutes long, and is a Western, can kind of transcend the genre and transcend the, almost popcorny nature, commercial nature of itself.
I think just about any movie can transcend its genre if it really contests with issues of the human heart. And I think that's why this movie is so, if it has any power, it's the power of a man. You talked about, excuse me, sorry, Gary Cooper's performance not being, super, maybe you didn't use this word, but maybe dynamic would be appropriate.
Yeah.
Or,
that's what I was saying. Yeah.
But he does, for me anyway, he does do a really wonderful job when he's given opportunity to just show a man that is really, which is a little unique for a leading man in a Western movie, especially from this era, to be a leading man that is afraid. And I think we take that, at least I would take that for granted more today, because we are way more in tune with, like, everyone has PTSD from everything, and it was those baked beans that made me hit you.
Well, you go from like this to the John Wayne archetype of like, I got everything under control, don't cross me, and then the silent kind of, I'll shoot you in an instant Clint Eastwood archetype, to like the action stars of the 80s that are like wisecracking, and you know what I mean? Like this is, you're right in that sense that this is something different, because he's very vulnerable in his quietness in this, which is kind of interesting. And
I would imagine that's part of the reason why someone like John Wayne didn't like this movie. In fact, even 20 years later, he was talking. There was an interview. You can find it online, I'm sure. What was that guy's name? Parkinson, I think, British guy. Did a talk show, and John Wayne was, this is in the 70s, this is actually 20 plus years after this movie came out, and the host asks him, John, what in the world, I read this thing where you really hated High Noon and said that it was like the most un-American movie you've ever seen, and I for the life of me cannot figure out how this is un-American. Would you be able to talk about that?
John Wayne, a historically subtle man in his comments.
Very subtle. So, and he proffered his position essentially as saying, look, I just don't buy that people would be pioneers or settlers in that era and have gone through so much and worked so hard, and, who knows what kind of sacrifices they made to get where they are. And then all of a sudden, when their town marshal needs help, nobody turns up to help.
Right.
And he didn't buy in the church scene, in his words, the men are sitting on one side and the women are sitting on the other side, and the men are saying we shouldn't do anything and the women are saying cowards. And he said, to me, that just doesn't sound like the West. Does that sound like the West to you?
Interesting.
And so it's a little bit, I imagine, and actually John Wayne and Howard Hawks made the movie Rio Bravo. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Right.
Ricky Nelson.
I'm aware of it, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, so they made that movie in rebuttal to High Noon.
Oh man, that'd be an interesting double billing now.
Yeah, Rio Bravo is it's a fine Western. I don't think it, it's been actually a couple of years since I've seen it, but to me it has not, it certainly has not lived up to the historical kind of credibility or criticism that High Noon earned in its day and still does today. But I think it says something, that a movie that is so simple. It is, it's shot very cleanly. There's not a lot of eye towards making you feel something by beautiful camera movement or by excessive or artistic staging of things. It's very workmanlike.
It is, yeah.
And so it is interesting that this movie wins for, you got to wonder what else was up for best black and white cinematography that year.
Yeah, well, you think like the 50s, they're really starting to, both in color and black and white, like experiment, like there's still some noirs hanging around in the early 50s that like look amazing, because they're like, we've done noir 1,000 times. Where can we put the camera this time? So, I mean, I'm not saying that like the weirdest shot movie should win, but I do think you're right. I think like from the difference between me and you watching this movie, Justin, is like, you're going to have a you're gonna give more grace. You're gonna like, I don't mean you're not gonna be objective, but I mean like this is more in your wheelhouse, more in your like, I could watch that almost any time than it might be mine. And so that like workman-like quality for me in a horror movie, which is kind of my wheel, you know what I mean? I will give a lot of leeway. I'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, but the idea is good, or the story's good, or the villain's good, or something like that. And to me, in this, because at least this era of Westerns isn't necessarily my first poured cup of tea, that was verging on boring, you know, at times for me, like the like kind of by the numbers look of it. But let's be fair. There's a few really killer shots in this movie, and I think like the ones I can think of off the top of my head are like, you know, there's some recurring like visual motifs with the clock, and it just sort of reminds you like, you know, the clock is ticking and it's an hour before they arrive. There's like, you know, what we probably think of now as sort of stereotypical of like this long shot down the railroad tracks, just reminding you that train is coming. That kind of recurs a few times. And then Justin, I think the best shot in the movie is probably that crane shot where he's, you know, walking through town alone, and it kind of rises up and just re-emphasizes like, yep, he's on his own, because everybody else just sort of found their way to apathy or hiding or something like that. And I think I mean, I can't think of half a dozen examples off the top of my head, but I bet you there's literally dozens of examples of like that shot has been aped, you know.
Absolutely.
To say a similar thing, you know, elsewhere.
Because it works.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it looks great. Yeah.
It does what a lot of dialogue cannot.
Sure.
Or a lot of exposition.
Or like when there's no dialogue justified, right? Like he wouldn't be like walking through that street like, well, I guess it's just me. Like you got to say it with the camera, because like that would be really stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does, even though we don't need to go plot by plot, just to, you know, take it maybe towards the end or the third act of this movie. I think it does bear mentioning that when the inevitable confrontation happens, it's really not at least I hope it wasn't for you. I don't believe that this movie sets it up that it's a foregone conclusion, like, oh yeah, this guy, Gary Cooper's such a badass, he's just going to wipe him out. It's going to be no problem. I think there is some real, even though it's a very quick.
It's quick.
This is not an excessively staged gunfight, you know, and it's 1952, so it's not gory by any stretch of the imagination. But I don't think it's necessarily evident by the way that the story is paced and by what has happened before. I think there's some real, because of the way Gary Cooper plays the character again, very vulnerably, and because everyone literally turns their back on this poor guy, to me it is surprising almost that he doesn't end up dying. You know, I feel like it's almost setting itself up for more of a draw at the end.
You could see that. You could see that. Like, this movie is not like funny. Like, there's one moment in it that I was like, oh, that's kind of fun, when he goes into church and you know, one of the dudes in there is like, I think we better get the children out of here for this conversation. The kids run out of church and they're like, yeah, you know, they're like super excited to leave church. I think that's really funny. But other than that, like, there's not a lot of levity here. So like you could see this just being like, he stood up to the bad guys and he got mowed down, you know, or whatever. And so I do agree. I think that shot, or at least the thread that kind of runs through it, of this guy's, you know, he's the minority in this story, in the world of the guy who will stand up to, you know, whatever. And I say stand up, and I want to go back to one of your previous points that kind of caught my ear, which is the leading manness of this, the vulnerability is like, it really, I don't even know if it means to do this, but we have to give it the credit in retrospect. Like, it challenges the idea of masculinity, right? Like, that might have been held as, I'm not saying this like, he's not effeminate. He doesn't like, he's not, you know, breaking like gender norms or something crazy like that. But like the idea that like the most valiant or, you know, stalwart character in the story could be throughout the whole thing and up until the very end, until he does finally win, be like a vulnerable dude, a scared dude, a like conflicted dude even. It really rubs up against what we're going to see in the next 20 years of Westerns, right? Like, especially with the John Wayne, ness of everything.
And Clint Eastwood.
And
Good
Clint
golly.
Eastwood.
For very different reasons,
Sure.
I'd say.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you, man. And I think, the movie does the credit, or to its credit, I think the movie shows in reality how probably just about every single man who, if he had the cojones, like Gary Cooper's character, to stand there, would still be shaken from time to time.
Yeah.
Because you could die. I mean, that's
sure.
the stakes. You could
Yeah.
lose it all.
And I think they make it clear enough that like he could die, and that is, a primal fear that we all feel and, like deal with and whatever. But like also, I don't know. We should probably, before we get too far in here and forget, like there's two female characters in this story that have, lines and kind of matter. And they're both interesting for different reasons. I'll give you my take, and then I don't know if yours will line up with this or you have something different to add to it. But like you've got Grace Kelly as the brand new Mrs. Kane, which is part of the opening sequence of the movie, is him getting married and trying to leave town. And then you've got Helen Ramirez as Katie Hirado. And both of these are interesting for different reasons, because she's a Quaker, right? And so she's in a position of being like a bit of a conscientious objector to.
She's a militant pacifist.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you said something earlier. Like, this movie puts a lot of stuff on the table. It's not long enough, or I don't think necessarily strives to like pick apart each of those themes in great detail. But it's like, if we're going to tell a story about a man standing off against a bunch of bad guys, we might as well like weave in at least the beginnings of some ideas of like, well, what if somebody didn't think shooting them all was the right thing to do? And so you've got Grace Kelly, and you've got the parson rather, and then you've got Katie Hirado. And this story is like, she's really interesting because like she's she's Mexican and clearly in a town full of white folks, and like she owns a business and she has tons of agency, and is like, I'll tell you what I think. Here's what I think. If it were me, I'd grab a gun and stand next to him. And at the same time, she's out of there. And so I don't know, like there's enough stuff going on with the female characters in this story where it's like, I think I read some, retrospective review on this that called these characters proto-feminist or whatever. And like, I could see somebody who's going to write an essay being like, well, clearly they are. I get that. But I don't think that was necessarily the intent. But in retrospect, you're like, yeah, you watch most Westerns from the 50s or 60s and there's nobody like these characters. It's a lot of like swooning, subservient, maybe dumb, female characters, and they don't do like much of anything. So I do think the movie needs some credit there, even if it's not like its main mission, right? To like explore pacifism or explore what a minority who owned a business like in this era and time would have, done in this scenario. But man, it's like, it's weird that it's in there. You know what I mean?
I think so. And I don't know that I would agree that it's weird. I find it very cool, I guess, if I can use a really kind of stupid word.
Unusual and refreshing, I mean, not weird in a bad way. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think this movie, for as workmanlike as its presentation may be, its actual display of its characters and its revelation of the plot is, in my opinion, anything but, because it treats everyone much more realistically than the vast majority of American Westerns of this decade and the decade before. And I think there's other exceptions to that too, but to me, that is one of the powers of this movie. That's why it succeeds, because if everyone, this movie, I feel pretty confident this movie would not be remembered for much at all, outside of that crane shot maybe, if Grace Kelly was just like, oh, don't do it, and then she's feigning all the time, and Katie Hirado, character works in a brothel or something instead. There's just, that's not there, and I think every one of those characters you've mentioned, even the, the drunk
The eye
no, I'm
patch
sorry.
guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone in this movie is treated realistically, even if it's for a laugh, or it all has its place and it all feels like, yeah, I think that might be how that would go in real life. Oh, of course, I'm saying that with the big caveat of this is presented as a movie from 1952.
Sure.
So it's not like hyper photorealistic or something.
Right.
But the core and the essence of these people as they're portrayed to me speaks volumes about the integrity of the team behind this movie. And
Yeah.
I think that is one of the main reasons this movie endures, at least, well, I'm not trying to speak for you, Travis, but at least for some of us, why it endures today still.
Okay, so for me, like, if I had to compare it to other stuff we've reviewed, like if you've listened to other episodes of this show and we've touched on like certain movies being, I'm thinking of like Frankenstein, right? Like we did Frankenstein a couple seasons ago, and it was like my takeaway from that was like this is a more important movie than it is a good movie, and like
Yeah.
I would say to a much lesser degree because this isn't like there are objectively dumb bad things in Frankenstein, but clearly like you watch that movie and the spectacle alone, it's like that's worth your time to see those things on screen. This is a little bit in the same category, but not nearly as like, well, the movie's a little wishy-washy on the quality or something. It's just the stuff it's saying is a lot. It lands, it sticks the landing. You know what I mean? A lot more than something like Frankenstein, which sort of tries and then just doesn't. It sort of like pulls its punches. One of the other things, Justin, before we wrap up here, that I'd love to touch on and get your take on is, first time watch. I'm watching this and I'm noticing, oh God, it's Grace Kelly. She's in, Rear Window, and she's in Dial M I know her from Hitchcock, right? And then I see the guy who plays the retired marshal. Is he the guy who gave the job to Kane? It's kind of the implication I got, or worked alongside him or something. He's Martin Howe is his character's name, and he is Lon Chaney. And I'm like, man, that guy's face is something else. He's just got such character lines, and like he just looks interesting. Lon Chaney's like from the Phantom of the Opera, the original Phantom of the Opera, which like was totally groundbreaking for the makeup and his silent performance and like all that. That scene was the one that I loved the most out of the whole movie because it's kind of part of the little parade through town he does of trying to get people to join him and like, defend the town, help me out. I'll give you a deputy badge, whatever. So this guy's like an old kind of grizzled, beaten down lawman, or at least an experienced lawman. And so I was kind of hearkening back to like, Stray Dog and things like that, where you have this sort of generational passing of the torch. This guy's got wisdom and experience. This guy's up and coming. Even though it's not exactly the same. And just that line of like, what is this all for? He's like, for what? For a tin star? It's all for nothing. Well, it's all for nothing. I found the tragedy of that moment for both of them to be really interesting because just like where Grace Kelly's character is, a pacifist, and she's like, I can't tell you, I want you to go do this because like I've seen gunfire. I've seen what it does. And like, I cannot condone it. I like that that's in there. I also like that he is kind of speaking to the same thing. It's like she's not speaking to the futility of his choice like he is. And he's just basically saying like, you can go do this thing if you want to, but I just don't see how in the end it's going to make a difference. I love that. I love that because I'm watching this for the first time thinking like, okay, would it be better if he left town? You know what I mean? Like people are literally telling him that. They're literally saying like, we don't have any problem with Frank Miller.
Right.
Like he comes into town, he's got a problem with you. That's when the gunshots are going to start. And if you stay, you might be making it worse. And so I at least think from an entertainment kind of tension perspective, I like that question kind of lingered for me throughout the whole thing. And I don't come away from this thinking like, well, he is the absolute ultimate good. I think it's like, this is a convicted character and he's staunch in his convictions. And I truly believe that he believes he's doing the right thing. But I do think there's at least a little gap, a little room there with the way the other characters around him are written, where you can ask that question. Like, did he do the right thing, or did he perhaps make it worse somehow, And that's how life is, right? Life is not so simple that like, This is always the right choice, and this is always the wrong choice. I mean, I'm not preaching moral relativism or anything like that. I'm just saying that it is kind of a gray area sometimes, and at least in a Western where we're sort of used to the like, no, I got to do this. I got to go fire 6 bullets in his forehead, otherwise the world won't be the same. It's like, okay, there's people questioning that at least.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so fantastic that this movie ends with, we're talking about giving women agency. Here's the one woman that is a pacifist and says, you know what, I have to stick to that pacifist principle even more than my marriage vow, sort of, so I'm going to leave you. And she ends up firing the fatal bullet for one of Frank's henchmen and really allowing Will to prevail.
Right.
And I think it's great because that doesn't happen as some sort of like, oh, she saw the light,
Thank goodness that woman came around. I always knew she was a good egg. I prefer duck eggs myself.
No, it's more of, like when she fires that round, then she, drops her hands and drops her head, and you can tell it's because she just feels like the weight of her own conviction. You're talking about Will being convicted. She was also deeply convicted in her Quaker beliefs.
Yeah.
That she was doing the right thing and being a pacifist, and now she feels like, well, what was I supposed to do? I couldn't let him die, but I've just gone against my whole religious what am I trying to say here? My ideology, my whole worldview is crumbling.
Yep.
And I think that it's again a tremendous service to the characters and just treating them as real people as they might react in the real world. I'm gonna take a quick swig of agua. Right
Speaking
now.
of, while you're taking that swig, and hold that thought, I want to hear the rest. But swigs, can we talk about swigs for a moment? As much as I think this movie is, I'm not gonna call it a bad movie. I don't think it's bad, but I think one of the like most perhaps real, but also silly looking and funny to observe tropes in Westerns pops up in this a couple times, which is like, oh, something's wrong with Lester. Get him a shot of whiskey. And then they just like dump alcohol down his throat up until the point where I'm like, Kane and Pell are beating the crap out of each other in the horse stall for a good couple minutes there. That's probably the most violent part of the movie. And he gets the last whack in there. Kane knocks him out, and he just reaches over to the bucket that's conveniently right next to him, and then pours this bucket on him. And I'm like, I wonder if that was whiskey and not water, because
get him a bucket of whiskey.
He's hurting. Pour a bucket of whiskey on him. So I'm like,
I'd be feeling better if you just put some whiskey in his eyes.
Yeah, it's kind of the remedy in Westerns for a lot of things,
Well, gangrene looks like it's gonna set in, boys. Fetch me the whiskey.
It is truly the pre My Big Fat Greek Wedding Windex joke where they're like, put a little Windex on it. It's like, oh, I'm scared. I'm scared, George. They're coming over the hill. Just take a shot.
Well, you know what you need is a little bit of whiskey. It'll fix you right up.
Yeah, take a shot of my hip flask here. It's roughly the size of a keg.
I like that cowboy was starting to morph into a 50s ad salesman voice. That was that'd be quite the pairing.
Have you got an ailment that needs curing? Here's your whiskey. Yes.
Oh, thanks, partner.
It's just interesting that the theological convictions, which again this movie just touches on as far as the parson and as far as Amy are concerned. In 1883, there's this idea that, we have killed people, therefore we cannot enter heaven. It's just a really interesting, I think, because it's very similar to, that's how I interpret Amy. When her shoulders sag and when her head goes down, it's like, I have offended God.
Yeah.
And so I think it really does matter, and hopefully has encouraged some folks over the years to really examine your belief. If you believe in God, to really go deep on those kind of issues. Pacifism, on its front, it sounds great, right? It's like, oh, let's just not do that. Let's not fight, right? And oh my gosh, if we could all agree on that, then I'm guessing we'd pretty much live in a perfect world.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the Frank Millers out there are not pacifists, and they would be all too happy if everyone else just went, whoa, 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 don't want any trouble. Let's just, because that's how evil folks just take delight in oppressing and hurting innocent people, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about her character and the stuff you were kind of just touching on is it's a good enough movie that it leaves the room. You know what I mean? Like you said, like you kind of get the setup throughout the story, like he could not make it out of this. And at the same time, when she does make the choice to go against her moral fabric and fire that bullet, when they walk away at the end, it's like you're glad to see that they still have each other, but like she might not be the same. You know what I mean? Like she might not be okay. And the fact that you don't get some weird denouement of like, you know, and then they were just trucking down the trail, smiles on their face. That would make it.
It was all peachy after she killed that one fella.
Yeah. I feel like the short run time and the open-endedness of that really, really helps. Okay, Justin, we have we've hopped on the saddle. We've ridden through town. We've dodged all the bullets. We've drunk every drop of whiskey in the tri-state area. Let's give our final thoughts in our wrap-up section. Is it worth your time? I will start and give you the last word on this one because I think you might be nicer than me. But
Go ahead, partner.
So I think this is okay. I think this movie's saying a lot of good stuff. I think we touched on all of the things that I picked up on. There may be more in there for people like Justin who have seen it multiple times, but like it's not a complete by the numbers, prototypical kind of vacuous, empty Western that just exists to move the plot along. There's definitely more going on there. And I think for that reason alone, I got to say it's worth your time. The other question we answer here is how often would we rewatch this? And for me, I like Westerns, but I think I'm probably a little more...
Here it comes.
Coming over the hill, galloping faster and faster. I think I'm just a little more choosy with this genre. Where I'm not going to be like, that's a Western, I'll give it a shot. So I probably wouldn't rewatch this a ton, if at all. I feel like I didn't waste my time watching it once, and I think I get some of the historical significance and a lot of the thematic significance, but like. I did find it a little stodgy at times. Maybe that's the aesthetic. Maybe that's the fact that the story's not interested in like twisty, turny, happenings and events. It's really a lot more concerned with getting to that final sequence and the road that Gary Cooper's character has to walk down to get there. So it's good. The last thing I want to say is one critical thing that I think we missed in the recording, which is just I think this movie is like many 50s movies, and I'll give it a little leeway because the decade is just sort of notorious for this, wildly overscored. I think we talked about it in Sunset Boulevard, where it's like that movie has a big score, but it really undergirds everything. It really supports. This is sort of the one of the bad examples of it. I think it's like if this movie was just quieter a lot more and more contemplative, like the script is and like the performances are and like the runtime is, I think maybe I would have enjoyed it more. But I did find, moments of people saying things like, it's terrible, it's shocking, music just kind of coming in, going nuts. And, like my brother was 19, I watched him die. Like, I don't think that helps a movie like this. That's definitely not striving to just be a popcorn flick feel less like a popcorn flick. It makes it feel more like a popcorn flick. So that's all. Worth your time. I wouldn't rewatch it a ton. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, well, since I don't want to forget the musical critique you just gave, and I would definitely back you up. Unfortunately, with the at least with the orchestration.
Yeah.
That is it's way overblown, unfortunately, and I do agree that it would be a much stronger movie and probably quite a bit more artsy looking, if it just chose carefully, and maybe with more consideration to how to score.
Yeah.
Those portions that right now are just like Hans Zimmer. This is not. But I guess it's just it is. I cannot divorce the intense Western upbringing that I had, with probably maybe some slack that I give this movie.
Yeah.
Like, because while the orchestration does bother me, Tex Ritter coming over the airwaves and serenading me like 5,000 times like he does in this movie. Yeah, there he is. See, I'm smiling right now. It doesn't bother me, But I can totally appreciate that for the person that is not super duper into old country music, that could be quickly very grating. And so I understand that, and please know that if you watch this movie, you better buckle up and be ready for a lot of Tex Ritter.
Yeah,
he's gonna lullaby.
What will I do? Like,
yeah,
it happens a lot.
You got it, man. That's good. But why I like this movie is because
here it comes.
It's coming over now. That horse has got legs, boys.
Oh, this
Give me the whiskey.
Bigger and faster than my horse.
Oh, geez, that's a 12-gauge horse, son.
I think we like the same things, Travis.
Yeah.
I think that maybe for me, there is less of a question about did he do the right thing. I think for me, something about his decision and his conviction resonates with me. Not that, I mean, he makes it very clear. He even tells Amy, they have that dialogue where she's like, why won't you just leave? And I'm paraphrasing. Grace Kelly does not say that verbatim. And he
says, at the same
look,
pitch as you too, she's like, why won't you just leave?
Nobody really knows why she became Princess of Monaco and retired from acting, but it may have been that her voice dropped 5 octaves.
Oh man.
And Will Kane says, you're crazy if you think I want to do this, right? And so I think there's this very clear line that is drawn where there is zero desire on Will Kane's part to be some kind of heroic figure or to be Billy Badass or anything like that. He's just doing it because he believes it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that has something to do with why so many presidents, at least during the 80s and 90s, showed this in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there may be a little ego there. Worst case scenario, right? There's ego there, like I'm just like Will Kane. Or maybe best case scenario, they find a character they identify with in that there may be a time when they have to take a stand on an issue,
or they want to identify with
something.
or something. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, those are presidents from all across the political spectrum, so it's not like just in case you think it's just like a bunch of gun-toting Republicans.
Well, Reagan did wear a cowboy hat and was in movies.
Well, Reagan was also a movie actor.
But Bill Clinton played the saxophone. So
saxophone is underutilized in Western movies.
Not in this movie.
It's not a very good saxophone impression. But anyway, so yeah, I think if you are going to enjoy this movie, it's probably going to be based largely on whether or not you think Will Kane is doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. That'd be a really interesting study to run, Travis. We should just kidnap about 40 or 50 folks
and get them plenty of buckets of whiskey,
and then sit them down with High Noon and find out, did they hate this movie? Did they find it boring? Whatever. But then also try to narrow down, what did they actually think of the main character's moral dilemma? Did he do the right thing? Was he doing the wrong thing? Was it sort of gray? Anyway, that is really not helping us wrap up this episode. But I would just say, yeah, this is a movie. Also, if you're a Western fan, you're going to enjoy it. And this is definitely a movie that I'll be watching. Looks like my horse is coming back into town right now, partner. This might be where we part ways. It's been good drinking from that bucket of whiskey with you, even when it got a little moldy on the bottom.
All right, partner. I enjoy coming to the table with somewhat tepid reaction and then walking away feeling like, oh man, I got more out of the movie because we had a nice chat, Justin.
Let's drink to that, partner.
Oh, let's drink a whole bucket of whiskey. That's what my mama tells me will make me a big, strong boy. I don't know what's happening. Next week, for something completely different, Singing in the Rain, a movie I definitely have seen, and it'll be interesting to rewatch. It should be good.
Looking forward to it.
Join us.
Let the movie speak.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.